So, good evening, friends. Is what we are again back over here after a little pause, and this is with the Scientific Committee Society Epicon 2019 in association with Indian College of Physicians. We are having a medical updates, and in the series today we have the 16th update under the chairmanship of Dr. K.K. Parikh sir and Dr. Girish Mathur. And we are really highly obliged this time. We are having a beautiful presentation workshop from respected founder member of Dr. Uma Kumar from All India Institute of Medical Sciences and one of the very prominent and significant Rajasthan, Dr. Renuji Sehgal, very expertise on rheumatoid arthritis. So I'll request Dr. K.K. Parikh sir to start the meeting and to bless us to initiate the proceedings, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Pradyuman. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this 16th webinar of Scientific Committee Society. We are committed to disseminate the knowledge to all over India, to our physicians and clinicians through this Scientific Society Committee. And I feel proud to say that we do not have any assistance or help from any pharmaceutical company in all these webinars. We have made a society, and from that society, we are conducting all the webinars to disseminate the knowledge to all the physicians and clinicians, and we are feeling the impact of all. Our physicians are updated, they are getting knowledge, learning, and everything on different subjects of medicine. And I feel proud to say that my friends and colleagues, which are giving a strong support, are Dr. Girish Mathur, Dr. Pradyuman Sharma, Dr. Ramchandani, and Ajay Sharma. They are the most important pillars of this Scientific Society Committee. So let me feel honored to welcome our guest speakers of today's webinar, Dr. Uma Kumar. She is the founder and HOD of Department of Rheumatology, All India Institute of Medical Sciences, and Dr. Renu Sehgal, retired professor and head rheumatology medicine and rheumatology, SMS Medical College. So I welcome both of you and extend my sincere thanks and gratitude for sparing your valuable time for these webinars to disseminate knowledge to our clinicians and physicians. Both are great orators of great repute, and both are master of their subjects. So without wasting time, I may hand over the proceedings to Dr. Pradyuman Sharma for.
I request Dr. Girish Mathur to kindly introduce our respected honorable speakers.
Thank you, Dr. Pradyuman. A very good evening to all of us, to everyone. My mentor, Honorable Dr. K.K. Parikh Sahib, father figure of API and my source of inspiration. Dr. Pradyuman Sharma, the most energetic leader of API, the main architect of today's program. Dr. G.D. Ramchandani, very dynamic secretary of Rajasthan Forum of IC Fellows and RSJ Rajasthan. Distinguished speakers of today's evening, Professor Uma Kumar and Professor Renu Sehgal, both the leading rheumatologists of the country. In today's CME, we will be discussing various aspects of rheumatoid arthritis, a very common clinical entity. As we all know, rheumatoid arthritis is one of the most disabling arthritis, which causes much misery, pain, and disability to patient. But in recent years, the outlook has greatly improved with the early diagnosis and availability of effective agents to treat with. Today, we have with us two most distinguished experts on the subject, Professor Uma Kumar, founder, head of department of All India Institute of Medical Sciences, Delhi, Dr. Renu Sehgal, former professor and head SMS
रख
Medical
दो तो
College.
मैं थोड़ा बिजी हूँ, मेरा क्या फोन डिस्चार्ज हो गया इसलिए यहाँ बैठना पड़ता है.
To start with, I invite Dr. Renu Sehgal for her talk. She will be speaking on approach to a suspected rheumatoid arthritis patient. Dr. Renu Sehgal is former professor and head medicine department, SMS Medical College, Jaipur. She is presently professor, Department of Medicine, JNU Medical College, Jaipur. She is fellow of Royal College of Physicians, Glasgow, fellow of American College of Physicians, fellow of Indian College of Physicians, and fellowship in rheumatology, All India Institute of Medical Sciences, New Delhi. She is a member of Academy of Medical Sciences. She is on editorial board of Indian Journal of Rheumatology and Rheumatology in Therapy. Various awards like Zydus Oration at National Conference of Rheumatology, S.N. Parikh and S.C. Saxena Memorial Orations, J.C. Patel and B.C. Mehta Award. She has more than 120 publications to her credit. She is ex-president and secretary, Rajasthan chapter of Indian Rheumatology Association. She is a member of Executive Council of Committee Indian Rheumatology, former honorary secretary, Jaipur chapter of API. I invite Dr. Renu Sehgal for her talk.
Just let me share slides. Ma'am, let me say a few words in relation to the program. Just hold on. Yes. As already addressed, the Scientific Committee Society of Epicon 2019, associated with the Indian College of Physicians, Medical Update 16, under Dr. K.K. Parikh, Chairperson, Dr. Dinesh Mathur, and today's prominent speakers. A little word in arthritis, the swelling in the tendons, one or more your joints. Main symptoms, pain and stiffness, increase with the age, and after the rest, most common types are osteoarthritis, rheumatoid arthritis. We know these pictures, early stage, late stage. We understand that by the age of 40, 60, the patients are being diagnosed, and the female takes the brunt. 70% females are suffering from the rheumatoid arthritis. 50% of the rheumatoid arthritis patients carry the heart disease. As what the 2000, there have been a 46 per million, now increasing, almost doubling by the 2040. 1/4 patients have in America has an arthritis, and the cost is almost 304 billions, which comes from the lost wages, medical cost, and per patient treated by biologics. And 8.3 million people have a limitation of joints. The quality life is really horrible if not managed well. And the 88% patients feeling the brunt, the pain. 84, they feel difficulty in the exercises. 78% negative impact on their social life. 65% disruption of work, and 62% in sexual activity. The arthritis is the second most common of early retirement. In 2015 was 7.2 billion, which projected to 2030 is 9.4 billion of GDP. We understand by the birth, influenced by the genes, environment, epigenetic factors, rheumatic factors. Early stage or preclinical stage, the clinical stage, if not managed well, not be referred to rheumatologist, may progress to a very disability disease, or otherwise they go in a remission. Smoking does affect to a great extent the rheumatoid arthritis, the frequency used, depth of inhalation, and that agent stars, cellutoxin, and the quitting of smoking definitely makes a remission. Almost 10 years, the lifespan is shorter if not managed well. This is the classical picture of rheumatoid joint, knee. We know many of the joints, multiple joints on the both sides are involved, and very bad if not managed well. That's the point. Now, financial impact. A huge cost from direct, indirect, and direct cost from the hospitalization, and a very horrible disease for the bones. Now let's have our prominent speakers. Dr. Renuji Sehgal, who will be addressing us on this. Dr. Renuji Sehgal, please.
Good evening, everyone. At the outset, I express my gratitude to Dr. Parikh sir, who is Bhishma Pitama of API Rajasthan, Dr. Girish Ji Mathur, Dr. Pradyum Sharma for inviting me for this CME. I'll be talking about approach to patient with suspected RA, and I'll be giving the differential diagnosis of RA. As we all know, it is a chronic inflammatory symmetrical polyarthritis. Polyarthritis means 5 or more joints are involved. Chronic in rheumatology means more than 6 weeks duration. Inflammatory, I'll be discussing. It damages the joints irreversibly. Female outnumber male patients in a ratio of 3:1. Prevalence of disease is 0.5 to 1%. So in Jaipur, we must be having at least 40 to 60,000 patients of rheumatoid arthritis, and it occurs worldwide. It is very important to differentiate between inflammatory and non-inflammatory diseases of joint. The rheumatoid arthritis is inflammatory. The joint pain occurs at rest and increases with the activity, while non-inflammatory, the pain is usually more on activity. The joint swelling is soft in inflammatory, while it is bony in non-inflammatory. Local erythema will be present in acute conditions. Local warmth will be there, while in non-inflammatory, these will be absent. Early morning stiffness is more than 30 minutes in inflammatory, and it is less than 30 minutes in non-inflammatory. Systemic symptoms like fatigue and sometimes fever may be present in inflammatory, while it is absent in non-inflammatory. And besides these, the laboratory investigations we all know, there will be anemia, leukocytosis, thrombocytosis or thrombocytopenia also in sometimes lupus, and ESR will be high and CRP will be raised. Now the number of joints, it is very important to know. We will think of crystal arthropathies and infections. Oligoarticular, we will think of spondyloarthritis. Oligoarticular means 2 to 4 joints are involved. Polyarticular means 5 or more joints are involved. Then upper part and versus lower part. If the upper part joints, upper part of the body and lower part of the body joints are involved, then we think of the polyarticular involvement, that is RA and connective tissue disease. If it is mainly affecting the lower limb joints and axial skeletal with spondyloarthritis, and whether it is symmetric or asymmetric, this is also very important. In RA and connective tissue diseases, it is usually symmetric. Asymmetric involvement occurs in spondyloarthritis, and the pattern of involvement is also very important, whether it is additive as in reactive arthritis, and also sometimes in rheumatoid, one joint is involved and the second is involved, third is involved, and the such type of involvement is there. Then it may be persistent arthritis. It is persisting throughout the, and rheumatoid arthritis is a persisting. These are the various joints which are affected. Not involved are the joints, thoracic, lumbar, and sacroiliac joints. Rather than all the joints are affected. More affected are the hand joints, ankle, knee, and MTP. And besides this, sternoclavicular joints, acromioclavicular joints, and cricoarytenoid cartilage is affected, leading to hoarseness of voice. Now I come to the 2010 American College of Rheumatology and European League Against Rheumatism classification criteria of rheumatoid arthritis. It is a score-based algorithm. Any patient who scores 6 out of 10 is classified under RA. Now this is a classification criteria, not the diagnostic criteria. If you are sitting in the OPD, if a patient scores 4 out of 10 or 3 out of 10, then only you can diagnose rheumatoid arthritis. So there is no similarity of the diagnostic criteria and classification criteria. Classification criteria means the patient is 100 out of 100 having rheumatoid arthritis. So if we are doing some research on rheumatoid arthritis or we are recruiting patients for epidemiological studies, then we apply this criteria. Now you see here joint involvement, more the small joint involved, more is the score. Number of joints, if it is more than 10 and at least one small joint is there, so score is 5. If the patient has rheumatoid factor ACPA positivity, then it is more than 3 times the normal, score is 3. Now this ACP is was earlier known as anti-CCP. Now its name is ACPA, that is anti-citrullinated peptide antibody. Then ESR and CRP is raised, and the score is 1. Duration of symptoms more than 6 weeks, duration, score is 1. If it is less than 6 weeks, we exclude, because viral arthritis we want to exclude. I'll be discussing it later. Excluded joints are first MTP, which is involved in gout and degenerative joint disease also sometimes. And first CMC and DIP, these are involved in osteoarthritis and other conditions. So we have excluded this. Now, rheumatoid factor, I want to say a few things. It is antibody against IgG. It may be of any isotype, IgM, IgG, or IgA, and it is detected by all these methods. And it is mandatory to have the titers of the rheumatoid factor. It is positive in 75 to 80% of the patients. It is not present in all the patients. And high titers are seen in severe disease like severe complications of rheumatoid like ILD, vasculitis, or and the patient having subcutaneous nodules. Now, the rheumatoid factor positivity does not mean that the patient is having rheumatoid arthritis, because it may be positive in other rheumatic diseases also. All these rheumatic diseases, the patient may have rheumatoid factor positivity. So really should not depend on the positivity of the rheumatoid factor to diagnose a patient of rheumatoid arthritis. The clinical setting is very, very important. Now, false positive rheumatoid factor may be seen in elderly people more than 50 years. Infections, bacterial endocarditis, hepatitis C, tuberculosis, leprosy, diseases like sarcoid, and malignancy after multiple immunization. So all these conditions can give rise to rheumatoid factor positivity. Anti-citrullinated peptide antibody, that is ACPA, is an antibody against citrullinated peptide. It is 96% specific for RA, but the sensitivity is equal to rheumatoid factor. It is 50 to 70%, and it may antedate RA by several years, and it is usually indicative of severe. The seroprevalence of in 10% of other rheumatic diseases, and this study was published by us in JAPI in 2018. These are the various manifestations: PIP, swollen subcutaneous nodules on the posterior aspect of the body, then carpal tunnel syndrome causing atrophy of the abductor pollicis brevis, extensor tenosynovitis over the dorsum of the hand, which causes attrition of the extensor tendons and finger drop, boutonniere swan neck deformity. Then complications of rheumatoid, many complications are there. Few of them I have given the pictures. The vasculitis leading to gangrene, pyoderma gangrenosum, large ulcer, single ulcer on the body and with the blue margins, multiple vasculitic ulcers, eye complications, lung complications, heart complications, so many other complications may be there. Now, it is very, very important to know what are the changes present in RA. This is periarticular osteopenia. You see here more blackening is there. Juxta-articular erosions are there. You see this such type of erosions are there, and these are so characteristic of RA. And if there is cortex, growth of cortex over this, then they form closed spaces. These are known as geodes. And there is joint space narrowing. Normally, carpal bones have 2 millimeter spaces between them. Whenever there is cartilage loss, there will be whitening of areas where the joint space narrowing is there. This whitening is called hibernation. And these by this whitening, we can easily say that the patient has joint space narrowing. Besides these X-rays, we have sonography, MRI also, by which we can assess the inflammation, and by the vascular, seeing the vascularity and erosions also can be seen by ultrasound and MRI. Now we should discuss few cases. A 35-year-old female came with generalized body aches. Pain involved hand joints, elbow, shoulder, and knee joints. Muscles were also painful. Early morning stiffness, 10 to 15 minutes. There was no joint swelling. Fingers were puffy. Patient had anemia. ESR was 35, and rest of the things were normal. The thyroid showed T3, T4 were reduced, and TSH was raised. So myxedema can very well mimic rheumatoid arthritis, though joint swelling may be lacking, but we can confuse it because the fingers were puffy. Now we come to the case number 2, 45 years old patient came with polyarthritis involving small and large joints, early morning stiffness 1 hour, more than 6 months duration, anemia, high ESR, rheumatoid factor 240 units per ml, ECPA negative, X-ray hands normal. And about the meticulous history, we took about the extra-articular features, and Zika symptoms were found to be present. Other extra-articular features must also be asked whenever we see a case of polyarthritis, like fever, alopecia, photosensitivity, mucosal lesions, skin rashes, serositis, nephritis, Raynaud's phenomena, dysphagia, skin ulcers, proximal muscle weakness. All these lupus and mixed connective tissue disease, idiopathic inflammatory myositis, all can lead to polyarthritis. So we should never forget that polyarthritis does not mean that the patient is having rheumatoid arthritis. So ANA was done. It was 3+ positive, 1 in 80. ENA profile showed anti-Rho and anti-La 3+ positive. So the final diagnosis was primary Sjogren syndrome. Every moral of the story, every polyarthritis with rheumatoid factor positivity is not RA. So elicit a good history of extra-articular features. Now we come to the case number 3. Young female came with widespread pain all over the body, stiffness, fatigue, sleep disturbances, 3 months duration. Patient appears depressed. All joints were S0. S0 means there was no swelling. Too much tenderness was present over joints and soft tissue at certain points. CBC, ESR normal. Rheumatoid factor was positive in small, low, very low titer, and all these were negative. On examination, we found there was heightened pain response in response to the tactile pressure. The tactile pressure should be such that it blanches your thumb. And these are the pressure points which were found to be tender. And this is typical fibromyalgia syndrome. Patient has sleep disturbances. It can very well be confused with rheumatoid arthritis. At times, the patient is put on methotrexate and all. Now we come to another case. One male patient, 30 years old, presented with polyarthritis involving hand joints with ulnar drift. DIP involvement was present, and there was a nail showing pitting, as if someone has pricked up the nail with a needle. And there were fusiform swelling of the toes. These 2 toes were involved. Also had low back pain with early morning stiffness, that is inflammatory back pain was there. There was swelling of the left ankle, right knee also. So this DIP involvement may occur in these conditions: psoriasis, osteoarthritis, sarcoidosis, inflammatory bowel disease. So we look for the occult sites of psoriasis. We found retroauricular space having scaly lesions, and there was also scaly lesions present over scalp, which were outgrowing the hairline, and the patient was thinking it to be dandruff. Intergluteal cleft also may have the skin lesions, and the patient was having psoriatic arthritis. So hand joint involvement may occur in psoriatic arthritis also. Now I come to another case. 60 years old female presented with hand joint pain and swelling, pain at the base of the thumb, that is snuff box, knee joint pain and swelling, PIP and DIP were swollen, and this swelling was hard. Knee effusion was present. There was tenderness at the snuff box at the first carpometacarpal joint. Snuff box is at this joint. Wrist and MCP were normal. This is very important. Wrist and MCP were normal. In rheumatoid arthritis, wrist and MCP are involved. The 60 years old was having low titer rheumatoid factor positivity. X-ray of the hand showed joint space narrowing at the DIP, first CMC, and there was osteophytes present. So the diagnosis is clear now. Degenerative joint disease, which involves DIP and PIP, not the wrist or MCP. The nodes are there. These are known as Bouchard's nodes, and this is Haberden's nodes, and weight-bearing joints may be affected, and first CMC is also characteristically affected, which may be confused with the wrist involvement in RA. One female, 70 years old, presented with polyarthritis, hand joint synovitis, nodular swelling of the MCP and PIP was there. Patient was having hypertension, a coronary artery disease, CKD, was on telmisartan, hydrochlorothiazide, and low dose aspirin. CBC, ESR were normal, rheumatoid factor, ECPA, ANA, all were negative. The X-ray showed, this pinna showed this small swelling over here. And the X-ray showed this erosion with overhanging edge. This is known as Martel sign. And extra-articular erosions were also present. So extra-articular erosion, uric acid was done. It was very high, 10 mg/%. And the patient was diagnosed as polyarticular gout. Now, if you take the aspiration from this or from the joint, we can find the needle-shaped crystals in the under the light microscope even. We have seen so many cases with the light microscope. Polarizing microscope is not present in every institution. So if you just compare the two, typical gout and elderly onset gout, typically it is elderly female, polyarticular onset, upper extremity involvement, finger involvement may occur, the profile may occur early or without any history of prior attack, while it occurs after several attacks in typical gout. And the over fingers, there is swelling. Patient is having CKD, diuretic use, especially in women. So this case vignette is typical of polyarticular gout, which I narrated. Now, case number 7, patient, 25 years old male patient, presented with acute onset fever, polyarthritis involving small and large joints. There was pruritic maculopapular rash over the body. On the 3rd day of fever, fever and rash subsided in 5 to 7 days. Polyarthritis persisted. TLC and platelet were slightly reduced. All these ECPA, rheumatoid, ANA were negative. The IgM for anti-chikungunya antibody was done. That was positive. This was done on 5th day, not earlier. The anti-chikungunya was the diagnosis. Chikungunya arthritis was the diagnosis. These viral arthritis are self-limited in 6 weeks. Rubella, hepatitis B, hepatitis C, parvo B19 can give rise to slap cheek syndrome in children, Zika, dengue virus, and chikungunya is slightly more prolonged. It may be self-limited in 6 months, and sometimes it persists beyond this, and where it can present to us with seronegative arthritis. The patient, 55-year-old female, came with myalgia around the shoulder and neck, pelvic girdle, upper thighs, mild peripheral joint involvement was there, involving wrist. Early morning stiffness, 16 minutes, fatigue was there. Joints, there was mild restriction of movement of the shoulder, hip, and neck. And the stiffness was mainly axial. The patient was seronegative, rheumatoid factor, ECPA negative. The ESR and CRP was raised. On sonography, it was found that the patient is having bursitis, subdeltoid bursitis and trochanteric bursitis. And there was a striking response to steroids. So this is a typical case of polymyalgia rheumatica. Case number 9, the patient, male patient, presented with intermittent fever 1 week, polyarthritis 2 weeks, maculopapular rash during the febrile period, not otherwise. And the patient is also having lymphadenopathy, hepatosplenomegaly, persistently raised TLC. All the reports showed that the TLC was raised. High SGOT, SGPT, ferritin was more than 3,000 nanogram per ml. Rheumatoid factor, ECPA, ANA negative. Procalcitonin was done because TLC was high. It was also negative. The diagnosis was kept at adult onset disease. This was kept the diagnosis. It is a diagnosis of exclusion because we excluded malignancy, infections, other rheumatic diseases, vasculitis, and Rett syndrome. So all these things were excluded, and then we made the diagnosis of adult onset stage disease. And this is typical case of adult onset stage disease. One 35-year-old female presented to us with symmetric polyarthritis of the hand joints, tenosynovitis on the dorsum of the hand, rheumatoid factor was present, 54 units per ml, ANA was positive, 1 in 80, ECPA was negative. On examination, it was found that the patient has paresthesias, decreased sensation in the ulnar nerve distribution, erythematous macules and nodules were present. On closer examination, hypostatic patches were present, thickened nerves were palpated, and now our diagnosis was the Hansen's disease. So Hansen's disease can also present with the treat the leprosy or the Hansen's disease, this arthritis disappears. But rheumatoid may be closely associated with the Hansen's disease. And it is seen if of a patient of polyarthritis with the rheumatoid factor positivity is turning to DMARDs, we should look for the Hansen's disease also. So these are the various situations in leprosy where the symmetrical polyarthritis may be there. Lepra reaction, swollen hand and feet syndrome, and chronic arthritis may be seen in Hansen's disease. Case number 11, young female came with history of pain and swelling of the hand joints, knee and MTP. Early morning stiffness present, fatigue present, blowing and squeezing clothes was painful. Symmetrical synovitis of hand joints was present. Clenching of fist was painful, knee effusion was present, MTP squeeze was present. Extra-articular features, we could not elicit anyone. And CBC, mild anemia, leukocytosis, thrombocytosis, ESR was raised, CRP was 30 milligram per liter. And these ECPA, ANA, all negative. X-ray of the hand showed periarticular osteopenia. Now you see it is an inflammatory disease involving the symmetric synovitis of the hand joints was there. So this is labeled as seronegative RA. As we saw that rheumatoid factor is present 70% and this ECPA is also present 70%. Sensitivity of both is 70 to 80. So a portion of the patients may be there who do not have either of the antibody in the blood. So this patient is typical seronegative rheumatoid arthritis. Now we come to another case, 40 years old female came with history of joint pains and swelling. Only left knee was swollen. Rest all joints were S0. S0 means no swelling was there, but tenderness was there. Clenching was mildly painful. Early morning stiffness was present. There was no history of inflammatory backache. Why we asked? Because the left knee showed synovitis. There was clear-cut history of polyarthritis of the hand joints, which responded to puria given by quack at the periphery. The ESR was raised, anemia, leukocytosis, thrombocytosis, CRP raised, rheumatoid factor positive, ECPA positive. So this is typical steroid modified RA, which the quack gave at the periphery. So we should always see such type of atypical cases of rheumatoid. Typical cases we can all diagnose, but atypical cases do occur. So the take-home message is, rheumatoid arthritis is a clinical diagnosis. Good history and clinical examination is must. Synovitis is a very characteristic feature of rheumatoid. It should be confirmed by a reliable examiner since it is essential requirement for diagnosis. If the synovitis is equivocal on examination, patient should be followed up, or occasionally we may go for the studies like sonography, MRI. Rheumatoid factor, anti-CCP, all should be done. ESR, CRP may be positive. There is no laboratory test which is diagnostic of RA. It is just supportive of RA. And thanks a lot for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Renu Sehgal, for an excellent presentation. It was simply superb. You have dealt with the subject in a masterly way.
Thank you, sir.
We will take up the questions in the last. I'll invite our next speaker, Professor Uma Kumar, for a talk on guiding principles of management of rheumatoid arthritis. Dr. Uma Kumar is Professor and Head, Department of Rheumatology, Alia Institute of Medical Sciences, New Delhi. It is to her credit that she started the Department of Rheumatology in AIIMS, New Delhi. She pioneered concept of day care in rheumatology in India. She is a recipient of National Award for Popularizing Science and Technology, Australian Rheumatology Association, Asia Pacific League. She received International Fellowship, Japan College of Rheumatology, International Scholarship twice. She received Zydus Oration Award, Kalkan Oration, Jalota Oration, and Bharatiya Manav Adhikar Samman. She is an editorial board member of several national and international journals. She is past associate editor of Indian Journal of Rheumatology. She is past president of Delhi Rheumatology Association. She is an editor of book Dermatologic Manifestations in Rheumatological Diseases. She published more than 100 research papers in national and international journals. I invite Professor Uma Kumar for her talk.
Thank you, Girish sir. And at the outset, I would like to thank Dr. K.K. Parikh ji, Dr. Pradyuman, Dr. Mathur, Dr. Ramchandani, all of them seeing them after a long, long time. And thanks for giving me this opportunity to interact with you. Thanks to Dr. Renu Saigal. She has actually laid the ground. And she had a very, I would say, very beautiful exposition of the cases which she has presented. That just shows that it's not so simple to diagnose rheumatoid arthritis, because people might think that polyarthritis, but involving small joints of hands, excluding DIP, significant early morning stiffness is always rheumatoid. No, it's not. Sometimes rheumatoid factor is strongly positive, and rarely even anti-CCP can be positive. And over the period of months, patients may turn out to be having some other disease. Commonly, some infections, I've seen tuberculosis, I've seen Hansen's. Even in psoriasis, patients can have a false positive anti-CCP in certain situations where psoriasis is developing later and patient presents with. So, and it's equally challenging to manage these cases. So at the, I'm not able to move my slides. Yes. So the format of my presentation would be, first we'll understand the principles of management, then available DMARDs and their judicious use. What are the ACR EULAR 2019 recommendations for treating these patients? A word about rheumatoid arthritis and COVID, and finally concluding my presentation. So here is a lady who is 25-year-old, married, duration of illness 1 year, presents with polyarthritis. After many months, patient is diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, RF and anti-CCP positivity. X-ray hands showed erosive RA, and hemogram LFT, KFT was done, which was normal, and inflammatory markers were elevated. I felt, I may be wrong, but when I treat my patients, besides knowing about the joints, I'm also interested in knowing what is the disease activity, which was missing, because these days we are talking about treat to target, where we have to objectively assess the disease activity, and we have indices available to measure the disease activity objectively. Then I'm interested in knowing, is patient having some comorbidity? Because my selection of drugs would depend on as coronary artery disease. Then I would be avoiding certain set of drugs which can actually worsen. Then all of you know that leflunomide can cause hypertension in patients and even neuropathy. So selection of drug would depend on the presence of comorbidity. Then I am interested in knowing whether patient is married, and if married, completed her family or not. Because then again, choice of drugs would depend on this status. Organ involvement, if patient has pulmonary involvement, because in 10 to 14% of rheumatoid patients, lung involvement can precede the joint disease. So, or then when patient comes to us, the patient has ILD and joint involvement, then again, the choice of drugs would vary if patient has lung involvement in terms of interstitial lung disease. I would need some more investigations, because I know that all the drugs for treating rheumatoid have hepatic toxicity and renal toxicity. Suppose my patient has pre-existing liver disease, which is in compensated state. So I will find that LFT is normal, but still patient can have some viral infection, particularly Hep B and Hep C, where that can get reactivated the moment I start patient on treatment. So it's always better. We don't do it thinking that our patients are poor, they'll end up spending more. But sometimes if patients develop reactivation of Hep B or Hep C, then I think we will not be excused on humanitarian ground and we'll be taken for medico-legal recourse. So, and then explaining about the drugs to the patient is very, very important. So my patient had no comorbidity. She was not married, had no children. There was no organ involvement. Her DAS score was more than 4. So she had moderate to severe disease activity. Patient was started on methotrexate. There are two brackets there. One shows on the left panel methotrexate 10 milligrams per week, and then the prescription said that escalating by 5 milligrams every 2 weeks. Folic acid 5 milligrams, prednisolone was also written 10 milligrams per day. Here I would like to tell that yes, we can give prescribed glucocorticoids to our rheumatoid patients, because that helps us in building up the confidence in the patient, because they are very quick acting drugs, and methotrexate and leflunomide, they all take some time to act. So that period can be bridged with steroids. Once the patient has very high disease activity, then combining steroids with DMARD also reduces and gets a quick control of disease activity. But it should not be given for a longer period of time. Calcium supplement is not the routine these days, because we in our practice have found that patients who had been on calcium supplement had high calcium. Calcium was in the upper normal range. And we all being physicians know that high calcium can predispose an individual to coronary artery disease. There was a paper in BMJ where thousands of patients were studied. And so calcium supplementation is not the routine for me. The prescription, yes, I sometimes do give vitamin D monthly, 60,000 international units, but that too for 3 months. And then subsequently after a few months, we can repeat that. Non-steroidals, I don't try it, because I prefer giving paracetamol, because steroid and is very lethal. Patient can have GI bleed or some other complications. So if it is not required, I usually write SOS to be taken when required. And in the second prescription, the other way of writing is methotrexate 10 milligrams per week, and rest remains the same. And patient was asked to review at 3 months. So see, patient comes at 3 months. There is now disease activity has come down a bit, but still disease is active, which is evident from CRP, early morning stiffness, tender and swollen joints. Patient says that I want to get married within a year. My marriage is fixed. So then what to do? Because patient is already on methotrexate. She has reached to 25 milligrams in 3 months, because was started with 15 and then stepped up by 5 milligrams every two weeks. So what next? So we have to control the disease activity very quickly, and we have to select drugs very safely, because there are chances that she gets married and thinks of drugs like methotrexate and leflunomide, which she is on. And then option given to her for controlling the disease activity, injectable methotrexate going up to 25 milligrams. Why injectable? I'll come to that little later. Or adding another conventional synthetic disease modifying anti-rheumatic drugs, maybe sulfasalazine. Hydroxychloroquine is a very mild DMARD, so it doesn't really help in moderate to severe cases. Or adding biologics or targeted synthetic DMARDs. Right? So we have so many options available, but patient says she cannot afford anything. She cannot afford biologics. She cannot afford targeted synthetic DMARDs like JAK inhibitors. So she prefers taking injection methotrexate, but she is counseled that she'll have to stop methotrexate if she gets pregnant after marriage, which she agrees to. And then when she comes at 6 months, after 3 months of taking 25 milligrams methotrexate, she has quiescent disease, right? Disease gets controlled, which was partially controlled on oral. But why is that happening? We'll see that little later. So treating rheumatoid is basically, we have to learn with trial and error method. Treatment has to be individualized. I can't tell you, okay, this patient comes like this, you give methotrexate, you give leflunomide or sulfasalazine or TNF inhibitors. No, based on many factors, we have to choose our drugs. That is true that methotrexate is the sheet anchor drug for all the patients of rheumatoid arthritis. So that preferred if there is no contraindications. So as you can see in this table, on the left panel, you see mean bioavailability. So as the dose increases to 25 milligrams, and you see if the patient takes parenteral methotrexate, that is subcutaneous, bioavailability keeps on increasing, so that at 25 milligrams, you can see 41% increase in bioavailability. Why is that happening? That when the methotrexate dose goes up from 15 to 17.5 milligrams to 25, the gut receptors, they get saturated, and increase in dose is not similar to increasing the bioavailability. So it's always preferred to use injectable if we are going beyond 17.5 milligrams per week, or split the dose the same day, not giving alternate day, because then the cell cycle gets affected when you give it alternate day. So it should be given the same day. You can keep gap of 8 to 10 hours. That is like giving at 10 o'clock in the morning and then 4 o'clock in the evening. So that kind of splitting can be done if we are giving 25 or 30 milligrams methotrexate to these patients. And here on the right panel, you can also see that when patient was put on subcutaneous methotrexate, the response was much better. 40, here you can see this shows difference in clinical response. Oral, 77% patient, they did not respond, and with subcutaneous, less number of patients were there in that group, which required change of therapy. Right? So parenteral helps. Then what decides that particular respond to a treatment or not? There are certain modifiable factors. There are certain non-modifiable factors. If I talk non-modifiable factors, that could be genetic component which patient has, and then you know, disease duration is non-modifiable, because when patient is coming to us, disease duration is already fixed. Then what decides modifiable? Adherence to treatment decides the response. Smoking, as has been told at the very beginning by Dr. Pradyuman, that smoking increases the risk of development of rheumatoid, also reduces the response to treatment. Gender, in males, the response is slower. Younger patients, less number of previous DMARDs, means patients who had taken less number of DMARDs in the past, they respond better to the treatment. Then deciding whether mono, combination, or biologics, whether steroids or not. If yes, then how long and how much? Here I would like to tell that patients who are to be given steroids, the dose and the route can be chosen depending upon patient's clinical condition, which is trouble. Like patient has polyarthritis, but both knees are making patient very disabled. So we can inject both knees, right? Or I prefer giving intramuscular grams of methylprednisolone weekly for 2 weeks and then stopping it. I don't prefer giving oral, because then patient gets used to taking oral drugs, steroids. And the total duration of steroids should not exceed by 6 months. That's what recommendations say. Even if you're giving it in an intermittent type of pattern, give it for a very shorter period of time as a bridging therapy. If we talk about the of management, the earlier the better. And we have now ACR-EULAR classification criteria, which Dr. Renu Saigal told about. But one has to be very, very careful. There are certain caveats, because 6 weeks duration of the disease short. Maybe some other diseases which are evolved. For other diseases excluded before making the diagnosis using ACR-EULAR classification criteria. Then the second principle is, after early diagnosis, treat to target. And why is it important? This is important to maintain the joint function, limit the joint damage, and prevent comorbidities in patients. So basically, what is a target? That's a treasure hunt. We are all kind of like in diabetes, you look for HbA1c, and then kind of you control the blood sugars, you daily monitoring blood sugar. So here we have the joint count, and various indices are available, which I'll allude to a little later. So target is remission or low disease activity. And how can the target be achieved? By closely monitoring the patient very regularly, and assessment has to be very objective. And therapy has to be modified if the target is not met within defined time period. It shouldn't be like within 1 year or 2 years. Ideally, it is within 6 months, right? One has to change the therapy if patient is not responding, and there has to be shared decision making in patients. So treat to target is the second principle of management. And so the disease activity measures like DAS28, CDAI, SDAI, which is Simplified Disease Activity Index, RAPID-3. What I do, I'm not calculating DAS, I'm writing just tender joint count, swollen joint count, and since this is DAS28, does not take into account DIPs and ankle joints. So if they are involved separately, I write, because they are also to be assessed and treated. And early morning stiffness. So that helps me in guiding my treatment. So in OPD, if you do not have DAS calculator, so at least writing tender joint count, swollen joint count, early morning stiffness, and the inflammatory markers would help. And based on these indices, we can classify these into severe, moderate, or low. So when we call it remission, when the DAS28 is less than 2.6, clinical disease activity index is less than 2.8, or simplified disease activity index is less than 3.3. So then patient is said to be in remission. But it's not so simple to, as we talk about treat to target, but doing it in practicality is very, very difficult. And there are certain barriers to achieving it, like poor patient-doctor communication. If patient has not been told about in detail what is the disease, why we are giving particular medicine, why patient need to come regularly, why patient need investigations intermittently, and with crowded OPD, which is not possible many a time. But that is the crux to build up the confidence so that patient continues with the treatment. Patient medication aversion, doesn't want to take too many medicines, suboptimal treatment adherence, irregular follow-up, presence of comorbidity also decides whether we'll be able to achieve that second principle, treat to target or not, because number of drugs, type of drugs becomes very limited in those situations if patient have multiple comorbidities. This is just to show you nomenclature. We have synthetic, conventional synthetic disease-modifying anti-rheumatic drugs, under which we have this methotrexate, leflunomide, sulfasalazine, hydroxychloroquine. Then we have targeted synthetic DMARDs, where comes the JAK inhibitors, tofacitinib, baricitinib, filgo. And then biological DMARDs, we have innovator molecule, which is also called originator, and the lots of biosimilars which are available. So now we are living in that era where the pyramid is inverted, and the base is not therapy or pharmaceutical, but base is with disease-modifying anti-rheumatic drugs. So we have to really hard to control the inflammation. About COVID, that we have to have appropriate behavior and then to control it. We have various strategies available, like step-up that treatment is to be individualized. Initial combination is not superior to step-up therapy. Therefore, it's always better to give methotrexate. If patient does not respond, then add another disease-modifying anti-rheumatic drug rather than starting 2 or 3 drugs together. Combination therapy giving initially is always better, because that controls the disease faster, delays the radiographic progression, improves functional outcome, and reduces the work disability. Then we have once patient has achieved remission, can we think of tapering the drugs or stopping the drugs altogether? So with the current treatment strategies, it seems to be possible that we might be able to reduce the number of drugs, and there are certain principles which are to be followed. What I do, I give patient treatment for at least 1 year to 2 years, and patient is in remission, then I think of tapering the drug. But what literature says, that if patient has been in remission from 6 months to 1 year, one can think of de-escalating the treatment. And how to taper it? Then first you think of tapering biologics, and methotrexate should be the last to be tapered. And sometimes tapering steroids becomes difficult when we get patients who are on steroids for many, many months and years. So we have to actually go very, very slow, maybe 2.5 every 3 to 4 weeks. And sometimes we do have success in stopping steroids. Is my screen visible?
It is visible.
Okay.
It is visible.
Right. There was some problem at my end. So as I said, like, it is possible. And what decides the outcome after tapering? There are certain factors like in early RA, if the treatment was started, then the chances are that one would be successful in tapering the drug. In established RA, it becomes little difficult. It might take longer and we may not be able to stop the drugs completely. But there are various studies are there which have shown that patients who had higher disease activity prior to treatment with biologics, or who were RF or anti-CCP positive and established RA, there was, one has to go slow in tapering, and one may not be able to get the desired outcome of stopping the disease modifying anti-rheumatic drug. This is a very crowded table, but there are many studies which have shown that the factors which I just narrated had played role in occurrence of relapses after stopping the drug. So as I said, in established disease, it is difficult to get complete withdrawal of disease modifying anti-rheumatic drugs, but in early RA patients, there had been a success of 70% when in discontinuation of the drugs. I'll skip this just to show you that all these 3 therapies, upadacitinib, which is not available in India, filgotinib, tofacitinib, are equally effective. And the only concern is herpes zoster, and with baricitinib, even pulmonary thromboembolism is supposed to be one concern, and there's a warning, black box warning. So one has to be really, really careful while giving JAK inhibitors. What has happened? Okay. Now, just one more case where this is a 30-year-old female who has a disease activity score of 5.1. And she was started on methotrexate 7.5 milligrams per week, was asked to come at 3 months. Methotrexate was made 15 milligrams per week. Then again, patient came at 8 months. Leflunomide was added in the dose of 10 milligrams. She again came at 12 months. Disease was active. Sulfasalazine was added and steroids were added. I don't think anybody is convinced that this is the right approach in this patient. And this is the second approach where it was 5.1 disease activity, methotrexate, straight 25 milligrams per week. 3 months patient comes, there is disease activity still moderate to severe, leflunomide 20 milligram added, and when patient comes at 6 months, you can see that patient has gone remission. So we have to be very, very aggressive, and the control of disease activity has to be time bound. For everyone, be it me or you, it's a challenge choosing the right drug for right patients, and that too at the right time to get the right response. But yes, it's not impossible. So we are able to manage our patients, and I'm happy to say that the kind of patients we used to get 10 years ago, we are not getting those kinds of patients now. Less of patients are developing deformities. What about COVID? Whatever studies are available, they mention that patients who have disease active, that means inflammation is there, they are more likely to have serious disease, like requiring hospital admission or ICU admission. But the patients who were on biologics, they had milder disease. right? Or they did not develop kind of disease which required ICU admission or required oxygen or hospitalization. So we all know that our drugs like hydroxychloroquine, tocilizumab, even JAK inhibitors are being tried in COVID, serious COVID, and possibly when our patients, they are on immunosuppressive drugs or disease modifying anti-rheumatic drugs, those drugs are protecting patient from developing severe COVID, because we all know that multiple organ dysfunction is happening because of hyperinflammation. So these drugs are not letting hyperinflammation develop. So that they are possibly protecting our patients, and mortality has not been, but it is very controversial. There are studies, some studies from countries which say that mortality is high, but in our set of patients, I have reviewed 200 patients with rheumatic diseases, and we did not find any patients succumbing to COVID. They all recovered, all had mild disease except one who required hospital admission. That was lupus patient. Vaccination, yes, we need to stop. Ideal is to stop methotrexate, leflunomide, all these drugs post-vaccination for 1 week to 2 weeks. But if they are not stopped, they are not going to cause any serious adverse effect, but immunogenicity may get affected. But rituximab, particularly, one needs to be careful because there is enough data to support that rituximab reduces the development of immunogenicity following vaccination. So that is what needs to be kept in mind. I would be concluding with 3 more slides. This is just to summarize. If there is diagnosis of rheumatoid arthritis, no medication to methotrexate, start methotrexate, go up to 25 milligrams, and it can be combined with short-term glucocorticoids if the disease activity is high. And then if there is improvement in 3 months, and if there are it can be started on simple Salazine. And if there is no response, then there are poor prognostic factors like patient is seropositive, very high levels of RF and NTCCP, high disease activity, erosions are there, and patient has failed more than 2 conventional synthetic DMARDs, is better to add biologics at this juncture or giving JAK inhibitors. So if patient improves, continue. If there is no improvement, then and there are poor prognostic factors are not there, then patient can be given another conventional synthetic DMARDs. And if there is no improvement, then the third slide, which shows that we can switch JAK inhibitors. If improvement, continue, and if no improvement, then we can have swapping of the drugs to achieve the desired response. So I would say that managing rheumatoid arthritis is not as simple as it seems. It's an art. Remission and achieving low disease activity should be the goal, and which is possible majority of the times if there are no constraints. Shared decision making is very, very important, and to develop rapport with patient and gain the confidence of patients so that patient listens to the doctor. And despite extensive knowledge on RA, it still needs to be communicated to the community, I feel. There is a gap. So I would end here. Thank you so much.
Very magnificent and beautiful deliberation, Professor Kumar. I think every one of us is more wiser to treat rheumatoid arthritis after your talk. Thank you so much. Well, I think both the experts have dealt with the subject very well, but we have some queries in our mind, and we'll put our queries to our experts. I'll request my friend Dr. G. Ramchandani to help me. My first question is to Dr. Renu Sehgal. Ma'am, you mentioned about seronegative arthritis during your talk, but will you please tell us something more about seronegative arthritis?
Yes, the arthritis may be either seropositive, that is rheumatoid factor positive, or ECPA positive. If both the antibodies, that is rheumatoid factor and ECPA, are negative, then it may be seronegative rheumatoid arthritis. But seronegative rheumatoid arthritis has several differential diagnoses. Like the patient, if the patient is having RS3PE syndrome, that is remitting seronegative symmetric synovitis with pitting edema, it is a definite entity where there is edema over the it is and usually seen in elderly patients and may be associated with neoplasms. So this is one diagnosis, which is not very common though. Then chikungunya arthritis is another arthritis which may be seronegative. Then the psoriatic arthritis and this inflammatory bowel disease. Sometimes in inflammatory bowel disease, we have two types of peripheral arthritis. One is resembles the spondyloarthritis, one resembles the polyarticular involvement as in RA. So these psoriatic arthritis and this IBD arthritis may be seronegative. And sometimes the paraneoplastic arthritis may be polyarticular, so that can be seronegative. So all these have to be considered when we are thinking of. Then, of course, the spondyloarthritis, if the lower limb joint involvement is the main involvement, then we should consider the spondyloarthritis also.
Thank you, ma'am. My next question is to Professor Uma Kumar. You narrated the management of rheumatoid arthritis in a very excellent way, but we would like to know something more about biologics. So what decides the selection of particular biologics in a treatment of rheumatoid arthritis?
The first thing is that, as I said, I don't use it as a first line, but there are studies which recommend use of biologics as first line in patients who have severe disease and who can afford it, particularly about Actemra, which is tocilizumab. But if patient has not responded to conventional synthetic DMARDs, and then I would prefer biologics. What would decide which biologic? One is, what is the affordability status of the patient? We have to look at the cost of biologic. Then second is, can patient take injection? Third thing is, can patient visit hospital? Because there are certain drugs which are subcutaneous, the other ones are IV, right? Fourth thing would be whether patient has some comorbidity or not. Suppose patient is 50, 60-year-old, has cardiac dysfunction. So anti-TNF should not be given. So it's better to avoid anti-TNF in patients who are more than 60 years of age, right? If patient has, I would say, tuberculosis, so under that anti-TNF class also I'll have to think of, because if patient has past history of TB or on a screening for biologics, and screening includes screening for tuberculosis, which is, I do both MANTOS and quantiferon, chest x-ray, ultrasound abdomen and pelvis, because sometimes lymph nodes may be lying in the abdomen and patient since has inflammation, so difficult to make out whether low grade fever and weight loss is because of what. So that I do HBsAg, anti-core antibodies also, anti-HepCore antibodies, because HBsAg can be negative, but still core antibodies can be positive, which can suggest that patient has infection with Hep B. And the moment we give biologic, that can get reactivated. So I do that, and HIV and anti-SCV. So these are the investigations which I do. Suppose patient has TB is positive, then I would prefer giving rituximab. I can give patient amongst anti-TNF, etanercept, because the risk of developing tuberculosis with rituximab is much lower than infliximab, adalimumab, and golimumab. Then whether other thing is, if patient has IgG levels which are very, very low, when we do that at the baseline for, if we are planning to give rituximab, then rituximab cannot be given if patient has hypergammaglobulinemia. So these are the, and if patient is married and kind of wanting pregnancy, and during pregnancy patient is pregnant, then I would avoid giving rituximab. Anti-TNF can be given till second trimester, then that would be stopped. A patient has, suppose, uveitis, Sometimes you do get in rheumatoid, very rarely. So then etanercept has to be avoided. So that is how we actually decide, depending on factor which, and if patient has diverticulitis history, patient is has dyslipidemia, right? Diverticulitis, tocilizumab IL-6 is to be avoided in those patients. That's a contraindication. If patient has tocilizumab has to be avoided because that is relative contraindication. If patient has a history of past malignancy, right, then rituximab is to be preferred. So that these are some of the factors which help us in choosing which biologics we would be selecting in our patients.
Thank you, ma'am. For first of all, before asking the next question, I have a wonderful. I congratulate and thanks to both the speakers for the awesome and wonderful presentation. And it's my proud privilege and honor for me to ask the question from my teacher, Professor Renu Sehgal Madam, and the legendary of the in the field of rheumatology, Professor Uma Kumar ma'am. And definitely we are learning rheumatology since last many years from both the speakers. So my next question is to Professor Renu Sehgal ma'am, that what is the palindromic rheumatism? There's a new listening quite frequently in the many times. So
when we are seeing patients of any rheumatic disease, they many times come with the complaint of that the arthritis occurs for few days to few hours to few days. Say for 2-3 days, there is arthritis, say of one joint or 2 or 3 joints, and then it subsides. And then it may recur later on after say interval of few days or few months. So such type of pattern is there, that arthritis occurs for few days, then subsides and then recurs. So this pattern is called palindromic rheumatism. And if a patient comes with this, we should get the antibodies done like ECPA. If ECPA is positive or rheumatoid factor is positive, then the patient should be told that you may develop rheumatoid arthritis later. Because in one study, it was found that 67% developed rheumatoid arthritis. In another study, it was found that 28% developed rheumatoid arthritis. And rest developed, a few of them developed lupus and Behçet's disease. So the patient should be told that if the antibodies are there, you may develop. It is not necessary that he will develop or she will develop, but he may develop. If the antibodies are negative, then we can just give NSAIDs during the arthritic phase for 2 or 3 days. Then we can just, if the patient has antibody positivity, then we should give the treatment. Mainly it is the hydroxychloroquine which is given if the patient is symptom free in between.
Thank you, ma'am, for clarifying this palindromic rheumatism in a very simplified way. So now I ask the next question. Is Professor Uma Kumar, you said that methotrexate is a wonder drug. It's a golden drug for the patients of rheumatoid arthritis. So its indications are multiple. So is there any role of methotrexate in the patient of interstitial lung disease, ILD?
Yes. In fact, this is a very controversial topic. Few people say that methotrexate other school of thought is that it's the inflammation which causes interstitial lung disease rather than the drug itself. The best thing is what is advocated currently, that if patient has interstitial lung disease, then methotrexate can be continued under supervision and monitoring. If there is worsening of pulmonary function, then it can be stopped. But to be on the safer side, if other drugs are available, then it's better to stop methotrexate. But if patient is not able to afford other drugs, maybe rituximab, then it's better to continue methotrexate. The problem with methotrexate particularly is that pre-existence of interstitial lung disease becomes, that is one of the risk factors for developing hypersensitivity pneumonitis in patients with rheumatoid arthritis. So then it will be very difficult whether there is worsening of ILD per se, or is the drug which has caused. But that thought that it is contraindicated in interstitial lung disease is absolutely incorrect.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kumar. My question is to Dr. Renu Sehgal. Ma'am, how to differentiate spondyloarthritis from rheumatoid arthritis?
Spondyloarthritis mainly involves lower limb joints in an asymmetric additive pattern. That is, one joint is involved, in left knee is involved, then right knee is involved after some days. So this is asymmetric additive pattern involving the lower limb joints is there. And then there can be enthesitis. Enthesitis means inflammation at the site of attachment of the tendons, ligaments, or capsule. So tendo-Achilles enthesitis may be there. There can be enthesitis at the chest joints. So the patient will feel difficulty in breathing, painful breathing may be there. So this is typical enthesitis which is present in spondyloarthritis. Then the dactylitis may be there. And there will be a typical history of inflammatory back pain, as I told you in my presentation also. Inflammatory back pain means low back pain, which is more in morning. Mainly the stiffness is more in the night also. The patient is not able to take turn because of this stiffness. So all these features are indicative of the spondyloarthritis. While in rheumatoid arthritis, such type of features are not there. There is a symmetric polyarthritis involving upper limb joints as well as the lower limb joints. There is no enthesitis, and the picture will be totally different from the spondyloarthritis.
Thank you, Dr. Ramsegar. Thank you so much. My next question is to Professor Uma Kumar. How to manage rheumatoid arthritis during pregnancy?
Yes, that's a very important question, and I deliberately did not include in my presentation. Yes, the initial thought that rheumatoid gets better during pregnancy no more exists, because during pregnancy also gets and remains active. So during pregnancy, sulfasalazine, hydroxychloroquine, or low-dose corticosteroids can be given to manage rheumatoid if patient can afford biologics and is intolerant to the drugs which I just said. Anti-TNFs can be given. Otherwise, methotrexate, leflunomide, rituximab, targeted synthetic DMARDs like JAK inhibitors, they all are contraindicated.
Thank you, ma'am. So my next question is from Professor Renu Sehgal, ma'am. That is, what is the RS3PE syndrome? Just we are listening quite frequently.
It is as the name suggests, it is remitting. R means remitting. S3 means seronegative symmetric synovitis, and with pitting edema over the dorsum of the hand and feet. So if you press over the dorsum of the hand or feet, you can just you can elicit the pitting edema very easily. So this is a typical syndrome which is seen in elderly people, usually seen in more than 50 years of age, and this may be associated with various malignancies. And the prognosis is very good usually. If it is associated with malignancies, then the response may not be that good. If you give low-dose steroids, the patient responds very well. So this is in 25%, it may be associated with malignancies. Otherwise, in 75%, it is very much responsive to the low-dose steroids and remits. As the name suggests, it remits in 2 to 3 months. So this is comparatively benign syndrome, but if it is associated with neoplasms, then it is may not be responsive.
Thank you, Dr. Sehgal. My question is Professor Uma Kumar. Ma'am, this COVID era, I'll ask a question. How does COVID impact rheumatoid arthritis?
There are studies which have shown that COVID actually can worsen joint symptoms. Because we all know that any infectious trigger can worsen joint symptom, or even viral infection can unmask rheumatoid arthritis. So I just seen one paper which says that is COVID resulting in rheumatoid? But I won't say that it's resulting in rheumatoid. Maybe it is unmasking rheumatoid. That can happen if any patient is detected as rheumatoid later post-COVID. So that is what it is. Otherwise, I won't say very significant effect on our patients, rheumatoid patients.
So I again request to Professor Uma Kumar, ma'am, that in rheumatoid arthritis, nodulism is quite common. So what to do when patient develop rheumatoid nodulosis?
Like if patient is developing nodulosis, we have to see whether this is because of rheumatoid or that is because of methotrexate which we are giving. So they are very simple things which can help us in differentiating between the two, but they are not always correct. One is nodules which develop following methotrexate. They are usually at the pulp of the finger and they are tender and they increase very rapidly. While rheumatoid nodules, as we all know, they are more common at the extensor aspect, and they could be fixed or mobile, and they are periarticular. They could be and they are non-tender. So this can help us in differentiating. So if it is because of methotrexate, right, so then methotrexate should be stopped. We can use alternative disease-modifying antirheumatic drugs. As I said, if the differentiation is not possible, then again we have to stop methotrexate because we know that is the culprit.
Thank you, ma'am. There are some questions in chat box. So I just take one question that is asked by Dr. Daria. Role of pulse therapy in rheumatoid arthritis.
Which pulse?
I don't know. There's written in the role of pulse therapy.
Steroid pulse. Corticosteroid pulse.
Someone came early in RA treatment and maintaining LDA.
I would say no.
Good evening. Hello. Yes, ma'am. This is pulse therapy basically. We are using this MPS methylprednisolone pulse therapy. So is there any role nowadays?
No, I would suggest that if you are treating rheumatoid, then please don't give steroids in larger doses. If you really want to control inflammation, that is, we are not giving steroids as immunosuppressive. We are giving steroids as steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. So in smaller doses for shorter period of time. There are certain indication for pulse methylprednisolone, and like one is this thing, if patient develops secondary vasculitis, right, which is known, patient can develop gangrene or impending gangrene, or patient develops intestinal involvement vasculitis anywhere, so which is organ threatening, that is an indication for giving methylprednisolone pulse, but not rheumatoid arthritis. No, I would say there is no data because we have so many options available. So pulse should not be given. Pulse means we give more than 250 milligrams.
Thank you, ma'am. Now we can have some more questions from our learned audience. If somebody want to ask some question, please unmute yourself. You can take 3-4 questions.
In fact, my light has gone. The connection is gone. I am running from a mobile. So I'm in a dark area. So the point is this, madam, how would you put the vaccination in the rheumatoid arthritis? Because number one, because they have a low immunity, so would you be prescribing influenza vaccine? Number one. Number two, pneumo vaccine. Number two. And how would you put the corona vaccine? The COVID vaccine. And in any vaccine, then which vaccine would you like to prefer? Covishield, Covaxin, or Pfizer, Moderna? How do you take it?
Okay. Yes, vaccination is very, very important in all our autoimmune diseases. And there is a recommendation for various vaccines. One has to avoid live attenuated vaccines. Killed vaccines can be given to the patients. And influenza and this one pneumococcal, yes, should be given. And as per protocol regarding COVID vaccine, Covishield or Covaxin or Moderna, I think any of these can be given to the patients. They are all, they are not live attenuated vaccines. Till date, that's what it is. So,
but do you believe in such cases, would you mind to give them a third shot also? Because in most of the countries, the third shot is coming up for the warriors and for the patients who have a low immunity.
right.
Like who have a renal transplant, who had heart failure, or who had a unstable diabetes, a third shot is also being recommended.
You are absolutely right. There is some data which is coming up where people are talking about giving first shot. We don't really know what would happen to our patients because whatever studies are available for other vaccines, our patients are able to develop the immunity, because what we are doing with the drugs which we are giving, we're just suppressing the aberrant immunity. It's not that there is no immunogenicity which develops following vaccination. but the amount could be low, right? So we really don't know. Maybe our patient would require, or maybe they will not require. So we can't say that at this point of time. But following vaccination, methotrexate is to stop for a week, leflunomide for 2 weeks, and rituximab is preferable is to not to give it for 3 months, but 4 weeks is the time where it should go. Even anti-TNF may not be stopped.
Okay.
In which case leflunomide to be preferred?
Leflunomide can be in patients where there's contraindication to giving methotrexate if the patient has methotrexate hypersensitivity, or if patient has developed methotrexate lung hypersensitivity. So that remains the first line drug. But in certain these situations, that methotrexate can be avoided and leflunomide can be preferred.
There is one more question by Dr. Subir Majumdar in a day-to-day practice, what we are getting, that how to manage steroid-dependent RA, which we get from the quacks, because it very frequently they used to go to quack and they used to start prednisolone in height, and patient is taking for a few months together, and they come to us how to manage in such situation.
I'll tell you my practice. We also get patients who are on steroids for many, many months or years. So what I do after assessing, patient is put on disease-modifying anti-rheumatic drugs, and then simultaneously in the same prescription, the dose of steroid is reduced. Suppose patient was on 7.5 milligrams. So I go very slow. So maybe I just write it 7.5 one day, 5 milligrams with alternate day. 7.5 and 5 alternate day. 3 weeks, then 5 milligrams maybe for 3 weeks, then 5 and 2.5, and then 2.5, and then see how patient behaves. So many a time I'm able to stop steroids. Unfortunately, I have not come across many patients who develop the adrenal insufficiency. So that is something which we don't really know why these patients are not developing insufficiency after stopping steroids. And if you are not able to stop, suppose the taper and patient has symptoms, disease gets worse, I to continue steroids in lower doses, maybe 2.5 a day or 2.5 or 5, whatever way, wherever I'm able to stop. So I'll try to reduce it as much as possible.
Thank you. Thank you.
Madam, my question. Yes, madam, one question. Can I ask the question?
Please.
Yes, sir, positively.
Yes. Ma'am,
may I request everybody to kindly mute except the person who is asking the question. Yes, Dr. Solanki.
Ma'am, if the patient is not responding to the DMARDs normal, or and the JAK inhibitors are available nowadays, they are cost effective also, they can be taken orally. So are they useful, and how long it should be given, and what doses it should be, tofacitinib or the baricitinib? I think that will be preferable because it will be cost effective also.
Unmute, please, ma'am.
We are using JAK inhibitors, and now I have also started using them as a second line, not as a third line, because to start with, I was using them in by other biologics failure patients. Now we are using them as second line also. And but one thing needed to be, you have to take history of any arteriovenous thrombosis in the patient, history of herpes zoster in the patient, and getting the lipid profile done. If there is patient is at high risk of developing herpes zoster, it's better to vaccinate before starting the drug. This thing, tofacitinib is given in the doses of 5 milligrams twice, while baricitinib is, I have used 4 milligrams. I have used more tofacitinib than baricitinib, and response has been very, very good, as you rightly said.
How long it should be used? When we should stop?
Till the time patient goes in for remission, and then maintained in remission for say 1 year. I would like to wait for 1 year. If patient had been in remission for 1 year, then I might think of de-escalating the treatment.
So we can continue it for 1 year or 1.5 years or 2 years also. No problem in that.
Yes, I have patients who are taking this for last 5 years. So fortunately, they are doing okay. I keep monitoring lipid profile.
I think for physicians, it is very good because to give this DMARD or JAK inhibitor will be easier and it can be monitored well also. Otherwise, biologics, they are very costly also. IV infusions, IV or intramuscular dosage should be given. So I think this will be the better thing.
Yes.
For the physician.
Now, role of HCQ.
HCQ is very weak DMARD, right? I don't think in rheumatoid patients who have active synovitis, simply hydroxychloroquine is going to work. I use hydroxychloroquine if patient has, suppose, polyarthralgia or just one joint which is tender or swollen. And PSR, CRPs are not very much elevated, just rheumatoid factor positive. I might try giving hydroxychloroquine to the patient for 5 milligram per kg body weight for say 6 weeks or 3 months, and then see the response. And if patient worsens, again switching to methotrexate or leflunomide and other DMARDs. Hydroxychloroquine per se is a very weak DMARD. One should not completely depend on hydroxychloroquine in have very frank rheumatoid arthritis.
Role of baricitinib?
Baricitinib, yes, but second line drugs, not as a first line.
Madam, its cost has gone down drastically.
But should not be used as first line, because if you weigh the adverse effect profile versus the benefit, then using as first line, the adverse effects outweigh benefit. So that is why not as a first line. First line, we have 4 drugs available. They should be tried, and as second line, it can be used.
Thank you, Professor Kumar and Dr. Anu Sehgal. I would like to invite Dr. K.K. Parikh sir for his concluding remarks and vote of thanks.
Excellent webinar and excellent interaction. I mean, we have so many queries which have been cleared by both of you, and it had been a wonderful webinar for updating ourselves for rheumatoid diseases and other things. So it has been a great experience also. I would like to ask you only one question. What are the first line effective medications for rheumatoid arthritis? Methotrexate, you said we can give up to 25 milligram, and injections, subcutaneous injections are better than oral medicines.
Yes.
Because bioavailability is much more.
Yes, sir.
Next is steroids.
No, leflunomide.
Leflunomide we can use as a first line drug, but many times patient don't tolerate what I have seen. But I don't think, what is your experience about leflunomide? And then this is the second drug. Then third one.
If patient has not responded to 2 DMARDs and affordability is not a problem, then I'll switch to biologics or targeted sympathetic DMARDs.
After methotrexate and leflunomide, if patient doesn't improve, you will switch to biologics.
Yes.
Or steroids.
Within 6 months. Steroids I'll use as stopgap, as a bridging therapy. Like if patient is too much in pain, not able to do the routine activity, then I can give steroids for a short period of time. Even the guidelines, recommendations which are available, be it APLAR or ACR, EULAR, they all say the total duration should not exceed by 6 months in the treatment of rheumatoid. Steroids should not be given because they don't do much good. They do more harm if given for a longer period of time.
But initially, as an aggressive therapy, we can start steroids.
Yes, sir.
So that patient gets confidence for the treatment, for the doctor.
Yes. 7.5.
So there is no contraindication to start steroids from the very beginning.
No contraindication.
DMARDs usually take some time to act. They take 6 to 8 weeks to act. So during that period, we can very well give, as Dr. Uma has already.
As a bridge therapy.
Yeah.
Yes, bridge therapy.
So, madam, how do you put the role of diet? Any role of diet?
To me?
Yeah. Any role of diet in management?
No, there are too many studies are also coming up. What I do, because if we talk about management of rheumatoid, it's about drugs, it's about counseling, it's about diet, it's about exercise. That completes the prescription, right? So diet, yes. I tell my patients, whichever food worsens your symptom. Many times patients said कि वो दाल उड़द की दाल खाने से दर्द बढ़ जाता है, दही खाने से दर्द बढ़ जाता है, तो आई टेल देम कि जिससे दर्द बढ़ जाता है वो मत लो. लेकिन ऐसा कोई रिस्ट्रिक्शन नहीं है कि आप ये नहीं खाएंगे, आप ये नहीं खाएंगे. बाकी जो talk about the omega-3 fatty acids that acts as anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, that I don't mind because that is not going to harm the patient. So वो ले सकते हैं. और फ्रूट्स में है कुछ जो एंटी इन्फ्लेमेटरी इफेक्ट होता है. फूड्स का कुछ फूड होते हैं जिनका एंटी इन्फ्लेमेटरी इफेक्ट होता है, लाइक हैविंग हल्दी, घर के स्पाइसेस, वो सारी चीजें आई टेल द पेशेंट्स कि दैट पेशेंट कैन टेक. Yoga is very, very important. Our paper got published 2 years ago, where I found कि yoga को when that was clubbed with drugs, effect was much better. उनमें जो inflammatory markers, they came down drastically in comparison to the group who was just depending on drugs. So I think it's a kind of holistic management. By counseling also we are reducing inflammation because stress is coming down, oxidative stress, then inflammation and other things. So yes, lifestyle modification is one of the very important parts of management in rheumatoid.
Because
so
obesity can decrease the effect of DMARDs also. So the person has to be of lean and thin type, not obese.
Well controlled.
Yeah.
I'll have better BMI.
Yeah, better BMI.
Ma'am, do you not consider, because heart disease is almost 50% contribution in the death rate of rheumatoid arthritis, at the same time strokes, atherosclerosis. So many of the complications are associated with increased high incidence of cancer also. So do you require to make more comprehensive management rather writing than DMARDs? Do you believe in it or not?
Yes, that is the right word. Actually, it has to be holistic prescription, which should have each component in its proportionately. And we need every visit, not every visit, like at least 6 monthly, we have to check patients' blood pressure. And I often do a lipid profile at the very baseline and then repeat it maybe after. Even the hypothyroidism is pretty common in our patients. 60% of patients with autoimmune disease can have hypothyroidism. So TSH also screening once in a year makes sense. So we have to do that. I mean, we have complete prescription includes all components: diet, exercise, relaxation tests.
ECG, cardiac evaluation.
So let us conclude.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, over to Dr. G.D. Ramchandani.
You know, Dr. Uma has taken vaccine and she is suffering from fever. And in spite of that, she has attended, she spent 2 hours with us. So thank you, ma'am. Great honor for all of us to be have you on this
Thank you, ma'am.
Webinar.
Honored.
So much. Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Sehgal, Dr. Uma Kumar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.
Really
Thank you very
grateful
much.
to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.
We owe to you this evening.
The talks were very informative.
Definitely. Very simplified and very informative. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.